Have you ever heard of a dance that could kill you? I'm not talking about a metaphor. I'm talking about an actual historical event where thousands of people were caught in an invisible grip that forced them to dance, sometimes to their deaths. This isn't fiction. This was the summer of 1374.
Our story starts in the city of Aachen, in what is now Germany. It's the middle of the 14th century, and for all anyone knew, it was just another day. But something was about to happen here, something so strange and terrifying it would spread like a nightmare across the heart of Europe.
And look, this isn't some modern exaggeration. We have accounts from people who were actually there, who saw it with their own eyes. A chronicler named Peter of Herentl described what he saw not as a party, but as a wild delirium. He watched people dance until they just collapsed. It was a horrifying public spectacle. And you know, the craziest part? It all started so small. Just one woman dancing by herself in the street. But then, she didn't stop. And pretty soon others joined her. Then dozens, then hundreds. It wasn't planned. It was like a virus of motion, an outbreak that just kept growing until thousands were swept up in it. Yeah, let's get one thing straight right away. This was absolutely not a celebration. This was torture. People who saw it said the dancers were screaming in pain, that they were literally begging bystanders for help, begging them to make it stop. Their bodies were racked with convulsions, and they danced until they either collapsed from pure exhaustion or, in some cases, died. Now, they called it a plague, and you can totally see why. It didn't spread with germs, but it was infectious all the same. This was a behavioral contagion, an illness that jumped from mind to mind, from town to town, with just terrifying speed. And it wasn't just some weird local event in Aachen. No, this thing spread like wildfire. It followed the Rhine River, which was a major highway of medieval Europe. Can you imagine the panic, hearing that entire cities, Cologne, Metz, Strasbourg, were falling victim to this uncontrollable dance? For the people actually caught up in this, it was a literal living hell. Physically, their bodies were just breaking down. We're talking about bleeding feet, broken ribs from the violent movements, and sheer exhaustion leading to heart attacks. And psychologically, they were having terrifying visions of demons or angels or, get this, rivers of blood. That's actually why they thought people were leaping so high. They believed they were trying to jump over a river of blood. And here it is. This is the part that gets me. To catch it, you didn't need to be touched. You didn't need to drink the same water. All you had to do was watch. People would be standing in the crowd, just looking on in horror, and then suddenly the same compulsion would take them over, and they'd join the frenzy against their will. An illness that could infect you just by seeing it. So what in the world could cause something like this? I mean, really, the people back in the 14th century, they had their own ideas, mostly rooted in religion and superstition. Today, of course, science has a few different theories. Let's dig into how those explanations stack up. When you look at the explanations, it's like looking at two completely different worlds. For the medieval mind, the answer had to be supernatural. It was God punishing them or demons possessing them. For us, in the modern world, we look for answers in biology and psychology. It's a total clash between the sacred and the scientific. So naturally, their response was completely spiritual. I mean, if you think the cause is demons, what do? You call in the priests. They performed mass exorcisms, they prayed like crazy to saints, particularly Saint Vitus, which, by the way, is where the name Saint Vitus's dance comes from. They even sent the dancers on long, grueling pilgrimages, hoping for a divine cure. Now, for a long time, science had a prime suspect, a fungus called ergot. It grows on damp rye, which was a food staple, and its side effects sound spookily familiar: severe muscle spasms and intense LSD-like hallucinations. And since the summer of 1374 was known to be really wet and rainy, it seemed like a perfect fit. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast. There's a huge problem with the ergot theory. Poisoning is random. It doesn't spread neatly down a river from one town to the next, and it definitely doesn't explain why thousands of people would be doing similar complex dance moves for days on end. The physical symptoms kind of match, but the social spread, not at all. So if it wasn't a poison, what was it? And that brings us to what is now the most widely accepted explanation, that the dancing mania wasn't really a sickness of the body at all. It was a sickness of the mind, a psychological fever that was born out of a society that was absolutely on the edge of a nervous breakdown. The technical term for this is mass psychogenic illness, and it's a wild phenomenon. It's what happens when a whole group of people are under such extreme shared stress that they start developing real physical symptoms, but with no actual biological cause. It's the mind, under crushing pressure, making the body sick. And trust me, the Rhineland in 1374 was a pressure cooker. Just think about it. The Black Death had just killed maybe a third of the population. They were dealing with widespread famine and constant political chaos. There were floods, crushing poverty, and on top of all of that, this intense, pervasive religious fear that the end of the world was coming. The psychological weight on these people is just unimaginable. So, the dancing. It starts to make a weird kind of sense. It was like a release valve, an involuntary physical explosion of all that pent-up fear and trauma and stress that had nowhere else to go. When you can't talk about your trauma, when there's no therapy, maybe your body just starts screaming for you. Now, it's really easy to hear all this and think, wow, the Middle Ages were weird, to just dismiss this as a bizarre relic of a superstitious time. But the psychological engine that powered the Dancing Mania, it's still with us. It just wears a different outfit now. Because this wasn't a one-time thing. History is full of these events. There was another similar dancing plague in 1518. In the 1960s in Tanzania, there was an epidemic of uncontrollable laughter that shut down schools. And just recently, we've seen reports of what looks like psychogenic tics spreading among teenagers through social media platforms. The context changes, but the phenomenon is the same. It's been more than 650 years since the Dancing Mania. We've mapped the human genome, we have walked on the moon, and yet the basic social wiring in our brains that made this all possible hasn't changed one bit. And that's really the key takeaway here. Back in the 14th century, in a culture obsessed with sin and demons, their collective anxiety came out as uncontrollable dancing. Today, in a culture saturated by social media, anxiety might manifest as symptoms that people see on their screens. The illness speaks the language of its time, but the root cause, shared stress finding a way out through the body, is exactly the same. What this all shows is something pretty profound about us as humans. We are fundamentally wired to connect with each other, to sync up. It's our superpower, it's what allows us to build communities and cooperate. But, as the Dancing Mania proves, that same wiring can be a huge vulnerability. It makes us susceptible to sharing not just joy, but panic and hysteria too. So maybe the best way to think about the dancers isn't as crazy people or victims of some strange disease. Maybe we should see them as people who are trying to communicate something. When your suffering is so deep that you don't have words for it, your body finds another language. Their dance, it was a scream made of movement. And maybe that's the real lesson from 1374. When we see groups of people acting in ways that seem bizarre or irrational, our first instinct is often to judge, to ask, what's wrong with them? But the dancers challenge us to ask a much better, much more compassionate question. What is happening to them? What unbelievable pressure is forcing them to this point?